It was a sweltering August afternoon, and I could feel the oppressive heat rising off the asphalt as I approached the Polo grounds. I'd heard the stories about Ray Chapman, the only player in Major League history to die from a pitch, but I'd never given them much thought until that day. 100 years had passed since his tragic death, but the legend persisted like a shadow cast over the stadium, whispered about by those who believed in ghosts. And now, as I stood there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I'd been called to the old ballpark for a documentary on baseball legends. I wasn't a believer in the supernatural, not until this day. The moment I stepped onto the field, something felt off, as if I had crossed into a world untouched by time. The Polo Grounds was long gone, replaced by high-rises and memories. But standing there felt like standing at the threshold of something ancient and dark. My heart pounded with a nervous energy, an unseen weight pressing down on me. I was there to record interviews and shoot some B-roll of the site, but the air seemed to shift the moment I pulled out my camera. It wasn't just the oppressive humidity. It was something else, something colder. I'd been sweating under the sun moments ago, but now a chill raced down my spine, the kind you get when someone's watching you. But no one was there. At least, no one I could see. I couldn't explain the sensation, but it gnawed at me. I pressed record, turning the camera towards the empty space where home plate once sat, trying to shake off the growing unease. The wind picked up suddenly, carrying with it a faint whisper, like a voice just out of earshot, too quiet to understand, but unmistakably there. "Leave," it seemed to murmur, a warning riding the breeze. I froze, scanning the empty field. My rational mind told me it was nothing, just the wind. But deep down, I knew better. I'd heard the stories, the ones about Ray Chapman's spirit still lingering here, restless, doomed to haunt the spot where his life was stolen. Skepticism had always been my armor, but now that armor was starting to crack. The shadows grew longer as the sun began to dip behind the skyscrapers. I wasn't supposed to be here this late, but I hadn't finished the shoot. My hand tightened around the camera as I aimed it towards the outfield. The lens seemed to catch something moving in the distance, just at the edge of the frame. A flicker, like a figure. I whipped my head around, but there was no one there. The empty field stretched out before me, the only sound the distant hum of the city. I rewound the footage, slowly, frame by frame. And there it was, a shadow, faint but unmistakable, a man's silhouette. I didn't recognize him, but something in my gut told me who it was. It was him, Ray Chapman. He was there, watching me. I tried to breathe, to stay calm, but my pulse hammered in my ears. The temperature dropped again, and I could see my breath fogging in front of me, despite the summer heat. I should have left right then. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get as far away from this cursed place as possible. But I didn't. I couldn't. Some part of me needed to know, needed to see him. I walked slowly towards home plate, the weight of history pressing down on me like a physical force. The sky above turned a bruised purple, the kind of unnatural twilight that made everything seem wrong. I could feel eyes on me, hear footsteps behind me, though I was alone. Then, without warning, the air went still, and the oppressive silence that followed was deafening. I stopped at home plate, looking out toward the pitcher's mound where Carl Mays once stood. And that's when I saw him, clear as day. A figure stood there, bat in hand, a shadow of a man frozen in time. Ray Chapman. He didn't move at first, just stood there, staring at me with eyes that didn't seem to see. His face was blank, like a statue, but the longer I looked, the more I noticed. Blood. A trickle of red running down from his temple, staining his uniform. His hand trembled on the bat, and his lips moved, silently mouthing words I couldn't hear. But I could feel them. He never saw it coming. A chill shot through my body, and the sky grew darker still. The figure, Chapman, shifted, taking one slow step toward me, then another. His eyes locked onto mine, empty, accusing. The air buzzed with a static energy, the kind that precedes a storm, but there was no storm here, just him and me. My feet were rooted to the spot. I couldn't move, I couldn't speak. I could only watch as he advanced, closing the distance between us, his face twisted, his mouth opening in a silent scream. I heard the crack of the bat, the sickening thud of the ball striking flesh, the sound echoing through time. The noises grew louder, relentless, pounding in my head until I thought my skull would split. And then all at once, it stopped. The figure was gone, vanished into thin air. But the cold remained, wrapping around me like a vice. The whispers returned, louder now, unmistakable. He never saw it coming. You shouldn't be here. I stumbled back, the camera falling from my hands, shattering against the pavement. I didn't care. All I knew was that I had to leave, before he came back, before the shadows swallowed me whole. As I sprinted away from the field, I didn't look back, but I could still hear him, the faint echo of his voice carried on the wind, haunting, relentless. Ray Chapman never left that field, and neither would I, not really, because some ghosts don't rest. Some stories never end. For as long as I can remember, Fenway Park has felt like home. I grew up in Boston, where the Red Sox were more than just a baseball team. They were a religion. My father and I went to every game we could, sitting in those cramped green seats, drenched in both hope and misery. I always heard about the curse of the Bambino, that infamous hex that supposedly kept the Sox from winning the World Series for 86 long years. My dad used to scoff at it, saying it was just bad luck and bad management. But as I got older, I started to wonder. I started to see things, the things that didn't make sense. It started a few weeks before I took a job as one of Fenway's night security guards. My dad had passed away earlier that year, and I needed to keep busy. I'd always wanted to be close to the park, to feel its history and energy. But once the lights went out and the crowd was gone, Fenway changed. The place felt haunted, and not in the charming, nostalgic way. On my first night, I did the usual rounds, walking along the darkened hallways beneath the stands, my flashlight cutting through the shadows. Everything was silent, eerily so. I've been to dozens of games. Fenway is never quiet. But that night, there wasn't a single sound. Not the distant hum of the city, not the scurrying of rats through the corridors, nothing. I was almost done with my shift when I heard it. A laugh, low, throaty, and unmistakably human, echoing down one of the tunnels. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. No one was supposed to be here. Slowly, I made my way toward the sound, every step feeling heavier than the last. My flashlight flickered as I turned a corner into the stands behind home plate. And that's when I saw him. A man, or at least the shadow of one, stood on the field, right where the pitcher's mound was. He was tall, stocky, and wore what looked like an old baseball uniform, one from another era. His back was to me, but something about the way he stood, so still and imposing, made my skin crawl. "Hey!" I shouted, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're not supposed to be here." The figure didn't move. I took a step forward, shining my flashlight onto the field. The beam caught the man's face, or what should have been his face. Instead, there was only darkness, a void where his features should be. His uniform, stained with dirt and sweat, looked all too familiar. That's when it hit me. The number on his back was 3, the Bambino's number. Suddenly, the temperature dropped. My breath came out in visible puffs, and I could hear the distant murmur of a crowd, as if Fenway was full again. The man, or the thing, finally turned toward me. He had no eyes, no mouth, just a blank, hollow face staring at me, as if he could see right into my soul. I ran. I sprinted down the tunnel, heart hammering in my chest. But the sound of footsteps followed me. They weren't fast. They didn't need to be. It was as if he knew there was no escaping him. I reached the locker room, slamming the door shut behind me, and collapsed onto a bench, gasping for air. For a moment there was silence again. Then from the shadows I heard that same low, guttural laugh. It reverberated off the walls, filling the room with a sense of dread that clung to me like a second skin. I couldn't stay there any longer. The next day, I tried to quit, but the manager just laughed, saying I was letting old ghost stories get to me. "It's just the curse," he joked. But there was something in his eyes, something that told me he had seen it too. The nightmares started soon after. Every night I'd dream I was back at Fenway, standing on the field under the bright lights, but the stands were empty. Then, out of the darkness, he would appear. The Bambino, his faceless head, his haunting presence. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. All I could do was watch as he walked toward me, each step a reminder of the curse that still lingered over Fenway. One night, I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. I knew I had to go back to the park, had to confront whatever this was. I arrived at Fenway after midnight, the empty streets of Boston, eerily silent. I made my way inside, the old park feeling more like a tomb than a stadium. The field was bathed in moonlight, casting long shadows over the grass. I stood there, waiting. My flashlight flickered again, and I felt the air grow colder. And then he was there, standing on the mound, just like before. But this time, he wasn't alone. Figures, dozens of them, appeared in the stands, ghostly, translucent, all wearing Red Sox uniforms from different eras. They stared at me with hollow eyes, their faces twisted in pain and anger. The Bambino stepped forward, his laughter echoing through the empty park. "You think the curse is over," a voice whispered, though his lips never moved. "It's never over, not for you, not for anyone who dares to defy me." I felt my body go numb, my legs refusing to move. The weight of the curse, the weight of decades of failure, of heartbreak, bore down on me. I was trapped, just like the team had been, just like every fan who believed in the curse. The last thing I remember was his hand reaching out, cold and skeletal, touching my chest. The pain was unbearable, like my heart was being ripped from my body. And then, everything went black. When I woke up, I was outside Fenway, lying on the cold pavement. The park was silent, but I knew he was still in there, waiting. The curse wasn't gone. It was just waiting for its next victim. And somehow, I knew I would never escape. I first met Rico Harris when I was 21. It was one of those chance encounters that seemed almost scripted by fate. I was a student reporter at a small college in California, and he'd come to give a talk to some of the basketball players. You'd have thought someone had rolled out a red carpet by the way people treated him. After all, he was a former Harlem globetrotter, a giant both literally and figuratively. What I remember most about that day wasn't the speech he gave. It was his eyes. They seemed distant, as if he was looking through you, beyond the room, lost in some memory only he could see. I interviewed him afterward, asked him about his journey, his rise in basketball, and his time with the Globetrotters. His answers were short, measured, but there was something else, something behind the carefully chosen words. Fast forward to February 2014. I was a struggling journalist, scraping by with odd jobs while freelancing for small publications. Then one evening, a name flashed across the news. Rico Harris missing. My heart skipped a beat. I was obsessed with the story from the moment it broke. A star athlete, a man larger than life, had simply vanished on a trip from Seattle to Los Angeles. His car had been found abandoned on a stretch of highway in Yolo County. But no sign of him, no body, no clues. It was as if he'd been swallowed whole by the California wilderness. I pitched the story to every editor I knew, but no one wanted it. To them it was just another unsolved mystery. To me, it was personal. I had to know what happened to Rico. I had to understand what had led him to disappear. So I decided to go there myself. I packed up my car and drove out to Yolo County, to the exact spot where his car had been found. It was late afternoon when I arrived, the sun casting long shadows over the desolate stretch of road. There was nothing around for miles except dry fields and scattered trees, twisted and gnarled like hands reaching toward the sky. It felt wrong, as if the place itself was hiding something. I parked and started walking, retracing the path investigators had taken, though they'd found little more than some vague footprints leading into the nearby woods. But something drew me deeper. Maybe it was the silence. No cars, no birds. Just a strange, oppressive stillness that seemed to thicken with each step I took. I must have wandered for hours, though it felt like time had stopped. The sky was growing dark when I stumbled upon something. It was subtle at first, an odd indentation in the dirt, as if someone had dragged something heavy through the brush. I followed it, my pulse quickening, my breath shallow. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but the sense of unease was growing with every step. Then I saw it. At first I thought it was a trick of the fading light, but as I got closer, I realized it was real. Rico's shoe, half buried in the earth. My heart pounded in my chest. I crouched down, brushing the dirt away, and found the second shoe not far off. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. No, it was the unmistakable shape of a man, sprawled against a tree just a few yards ahead, as if he had simply sat down to rest and never got up again. My first instinct was to run, but something held me there, frozen. The figure didn't move, no twitch, no breath, just silence. I forced myself to step closer. The man's face was turned away from me, but I knew who it was. Rico. But there was something wrong, terribly wrong. His clothes were tattered, far worse than a few days of exposure would cause. His body, it looked gaunt, almost skeletal, but his skin hadn't rotted. It was as if he had been drained, slowly, deliberately. My throat tightened as a strange sound reached my ears. A low, guttural noise like the wind whispering through dead trees. I turned, and that's when I saw it. A figure, just barely visible in the dark, watching me from the edge of the woods, its eyes glowing faintly in the twilight, locked onto mine. My blood turned to ice. The thing stood impossibly still, its presence suffocating, as though the very air around me had thickened into something alive, something malevolent. I stumbled backward, my legs trembling as I tried to get away, but the figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching, waiting. I didn't dare blink, didn't dare take my eyes off it, afraid that if I did, it would be on me in a heartbeat. And then, without a sound, it began to fade. Slowly at first, then all at once, as if dissolving into the night itself. I don't remember how I made it back to my car. My mind was a blur of panic and adrenaline, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I drove for hours, not even sure where I was going, my mind replaying the image of Rico's lifeless body, the figure in the woods, over and over again. I never went back. I never told anyone what I saw, not the police, not the press. I couldn't. They'd never believe me. But here's the thing. I can't stop thinking about it. I can't stop wondering if it's still out there, lurking in the dark, watching, waiting. I don't know what happened to Rico Harris. Not really. But whatever it wasn't natural. And now, every time I close my eyes, I see those glowing eyes staring back at me, as if they're calling me, pulling me back to that cursed place. One day I know I won't be able to resist.